You're in the middle of telling a story, carefully building to the point, and someone cuts you off. They jump in with their own story, their own experience, their own thought that just couldn't wait. And you sit there, your words evaporating mid-sentence, wondering if what you were saying even mattered. Or maybe you're the one who interrupts. You feel the thought bubbling up, urgent and alive. And if you don't say it right now, this second, it'll be gone forever. You know you're cutting someone off. You can see it in their face. But the compulsion to speak is stronger than the awareness that you should wait. Two completely different minds operating in the same conversation, and neither one fully understands the other. This isn't about rudeness versus politeness, though that's how we've been taught to frame it. This is about fundamentally different neurological processing speeds and conversational styles. People who interrupt often have what's called a fast associative thinking pattern. Their brains make connections rapidly, jumping from thought to thought, and if they don't externalize the idea immediately, their mind has already moved 3 steps ahead, and the original thought is lost in the cascade. For them, conversation is collaborative and dynamic, a ping-pong match where ideas build on each other quickly. The interruption isn't dismissal, it's enthusiasm. It's their brain saying yes, and here's the next piece. But if you're someone who waits, someone who processes more sequentially, interruptions feel like violence. You've carefully structured what you want to say. You're building to a conclusion. You need to finish the thought to know what you think. When someone cuts you off, it's not just annoying, it's cognitively disruptive. You lose your place. You forget where you were going. And more than that, it feels like your perspective doesn't matter. Like the other person cares more about their own thoughts than understanding yours. You're not being oversensitive. Your brain literally works differently. You need completion. You need space. You need the rhythm of turn-taking in conversation, because that's how you process and connect. And here's where it gets complicated. Neither way is wrong. Neither way is better. But we live in a culture that tends to reward the interrupters. Fast talking, quick thinking, dominant conversation styles are read as confidence, as intelligence, as leadership. If you wait your turn, if you pause to think before speaking, if you need time to formulate your response, you're often perceived as slower, less engaged, less competent. Meanwhile, people who interrupt constantly are told they're rude, that they don't listen, that they're self-centered. Both sides are being judged for their natural cognitive processing style, and both sides are suffering because of it. If you're an interrupter, you've probably been shamed for it your whole life. Told to wait your turn, to let others finish, to be more considerate. And you've tried. You've bitten your tongue so hard it bleeds. But the thoughts keep coming, and holding them back feels like trying to contain a flood with your bare hands. You're not trying to dominate. You're not trying to be rude. Your brain is just moving faster than the conversation, and the gap between thought and speech is nearly non-existent. You might have ADHD. You might just have a naturally fast processing speed. Either way, you've internalized the message that something is wrong with you, that you need to control yourself better, that your natural way of engaging is fundamentally flawed. If you're a waiter, you've probably been talked over your entire life. You've watched people interrupt each other constantly and wondered how they do it, how they jump into conversations without fear, how they claim space so easily. You've had brilliant thoughts that never got voiced because by the time there was an opening, the conversation had moved on. You've been in meetings where the loudest voice won, not the best idea. You've been in relationships where you felt unheard because your partner couldn't stop talking long enough to let you finish a sentence. And you've probably internalized the message that you're too slow, too quiet, too passive, that if you really had something important to say, you'd find a way to say it. Both of these internal narratives are lies. The interrupter is not fundamentally rude or selfish. The waiter is not fundamentally weak or unimportant. These are different operating systems, different neurological wirings, different but equally valid ways of processing information and engaging with the world. The problem is not the individuals. The problem is a culture that hasn't learned to honor cognitive diversity, that insists there's one right way to communicate when in reality, there are as many right ways as there are types of minds. Now let's talk about rules. You see a sign that says "Do not walk on the grass," and you don't walk on the grass. Not because you're afraid of getting caught. Not because you think the grass will die if you step on it. But because the rule exists, and rules have a purpose. And part of living in society means following the agreed-upon structures even when they're inconvenient. Meanwhile, someone else sees the same sign and immediately wonders why. Is the grass actually fragile? Is this rule serving anyone? Is there a good reason for it, or is it just arbitrary authority? And if it seems arbitrary, if the grass looks perfectly fine, if cutting across it saves time and harms nothing, they walk across it without a second thought. This is not about morality. This is about how your brain relates to structure and authority. People who follow rules tend to have what psychologists call a high conscientiousness factor. They see rules as social contracts that create order and predictability. They believe that if everyone just followed the guidelines, society would function smoothly. They feel discomfort, sometimes even physical anxiety, when they break a rule, even a small one. It's not about fear of punishment. It's about a deep internal need for structure and a belief that structure serves everyone. People who bend rules aren't anarchists or rebels without cause. They have what's called a high openness to experience combined with independent thinking. They see rules as suggestions, as starting points for negotiation, as things that may have made sense when they were created but might not apply to this specific situation. They're not breaking rules to be difficult. They're thinking critically about whether the rule serves the purpose it's meant to serve. They're comfortable with ambiguity. They're comfortable with making judgment calls. They trust their own assessment of a situation more than they trust arbitrary authority. And predictably, these two types of people drive each other insane. If you're a rule follower, rule benders look irresponsible, entitled, like they think they're special or above the social contract. You see someone cut in line or ignore a posted sign or find a loophole in a policy, and it feels unfair. It feels like they're getting away with something they shouldn't. It creates resentment. It makes you feel like your adherence to rules is being punished while their flexibility is being rewarded. And sometimes it is. Sometimes the people who bend rules do get ahead, while the people who follow them stay stuck. If you're a rule bender, rule followers look rigid, unable to think for themselves, blindly obedient to authority without questioning whether the authority deserves obedience. You see someone follow a rule that makes no sense in context, and it baffles you. It feels like they've turned off their critical thinking. It feels like they're choosing compliance over common sense. And sometimes that's true too. Sometimes blind rule following does more harm than good. Sometimes questioning authority is exactly what's needed. But here's what both sides miss. Rule followers provide stability. They create the structure that allows society to function. They're the people who show up on time, who do what they say they'll do, who can be counted on to follow through. Without them, everything would be chaos. Rule benders provide innovation. They see possibilities that rule followers miss. They solve problems creatively. They push boundaries and question outdated systems and create change. Without them, everything would be stagnant. We need both. The tension between these two types is not a bug. It's a feature. It's how societies evolve while maintaining enough stability to function. The problem comes when either side sees their way as the only way, when rule followers try to force everyone into rigid compliance, when rule benders dismiss all structure as oppressive. The truth is somewhere in the middle. Some rules are essential and should be followed. Some rules are outdated and should be challenged. The wisdom is knowing which is which. And that requires both types of thinkers working together instead of judging each other. Let me paint another picture. You have a trip coming up in 2 months. You've already booked the flights, researched the hotels, created a detailed itinerary with backup options, packed a list of everything you'll need, and checked the weather forecast even though it's too far out to be accurate. You've thought through every possible scenario. You know where you'll eat dinner on Tuesday. You know which museum you'll visit Wednesday morning. You have contingency plans for your contingency plans. This is how you travel. This is how you do everything. Planning gives you a sense of control, reduces your anxiety, makes you feel prepared for whatever might happen. Someone else finds out about a cheap flight, books it 3 days before departure, throws some clothes in a bag, and figures everything else out when they get there. No itinerary, no reservations, no plan beyond landing in a new place and seeing what happens. They'll find a place to stay when they arrive. They'll eat wherever looks good in the moment. They'll follow their intuition and let the experience unfold organically. This is how they travel. This is how they do everything. Planning feels restrictive, like it kills spontaneity, like it turns an adventure into a checklist. And I need to pause here because I know some of you are reading this and seeing yourself so clearly in one of these descriptions, and maybe you're realizing that the way you operate, the way you've always operated, is actually a legitimate cognitive style and not a character flaw. So here's what I want you to do. Leave a comment below. It can be simple. Just write "I'm a planner," or "I improvise," or even just "I finally understand why I am the way I am." Because when you do that, when you name it, you're validating your own experience, and you're also creating a moment of recognition for someone else who's reading and feeling less alone. So go ahead, comment. Let yourself be seen. I read every single one, and I want to hear from you. Planners are not control freaks, though that's what they're often called. They're people with a low tolerance for uncertainty and a high need for predictability. Their brains feel safer when they know what's coming. The act of planning reduces their cortisol levels. It literally calms their nervous system. When life is unpredictable, when things don't go according to plan, their stress response activates. Not because they're rigid or uptight, but because their brain is wired to find safety in structure and predictability. Improvisers are not irresponsible or flaky, though that's the label they often get. They're people with a high tolerance for uncertainty and a low need for predictability. Their brains feel restricted by too much planning. They thrive in ambiguity. They're energized by the unknown. When life is too structured, too planned out, they feel suffocated. Their creativity shuts down. They lose motivation. Not because they're lazy or can't commit, but because their brain is wired to find freedom in spontaneity and flexibility. And once again, we see the pattern. Two fundamentally different neurological profiles, both valid, both functional, but constantly in conflict because we insist on framing one as right and the other as wrong. In most professional environments, planning is rewarded. Show up with a detailed project plan, and you look competent, organized, reliable. Show up with a loose framework and a willingness to adapt, and you look unprepared, unprofessional, like you don't take things seriously. Meanwhile, in creative fields, in startups, in situations that require rapid adaptation, the improvisers thrive and the planners struggle. The planner wants a roadmap. The improviser wants space to explore. Neither is better. They're suited to different contexts, but in personal relationships, this difference can create real friction. The planner wants to book the restaurant 2 weeks in advance. The improviser wants to decide where to eat when they're hungry. The planner wants to discuss the 5-year plan. The improviser wants to see where life takes them. The planner experiences the improviser's flexibility as anxiety-inducing lack of commitment. The improviser experiences the planner's structure as controlling rigidity. And both are right. From their respective nervous systems, from their respective ways of processing the world, the other person's approach genuinely is uncomfortable. The solution is not for one person to change. The solution is understanding. It's the planner recognizing that the improviser's spontaneity is not disrespect for their need for structure. It's a different but equally valid way of moving through the world. It's the improviser recognizing that the planner's need for advanced planning is not an attempt to control everything. It's how they regulate their nervous system and feel safe. When both people can see the other's approach as different rather than deficient, they can start to find middle ground. They can negotiate. They can take turns. They can honor both needs without either person having to fundamentally change who they are. Now think about waiting in line. You're standing there, and it's moving slowly, and every second feels like an hour. Your leg bounces, your jaw clenches. You check your phone obsessively. You mentally calculate whether there's a faster line you could switch to. You feel your irritation rising, this burning impatience that you can't quite control. Meanwhile, the person next to you is completely relaxed. They're observing the people around them, or lost in thought, or just existing in the moment without any apparent distress. Same line, same wait. Completely different internal experiences. People who hate waiting have what's called a high intolerance for delay of gratification, combined with often a more sensitive dopamine system. Their brain craves forward movement, progress, achievement of the goal. Waiting feels like wasted time, like being trapped, like the world is moving too slowly. This isn't impatience in the moral sense. This is neurological. Their brain is screaming that something should be happening and it's not, and this is wrong, and they need to do something to make it faster, even when there's nothing they can do. Even when the rational part of their brain knows that getting angry won't make the line move faster. The emotional brain doesn't care. It wants what it wants now. People who don't mind waiting, who can stand in line or sit in traffic without distress, they have a naturally higher tolerance for delay and often a less reactive dopamine system. Waiting doesn't trigger their stress response. It's just time. Time they can use to think or observe or simply be. They're not more patient in the sense of suppressing impatience. They're genuinely not experiencing the same level of discomfort. Their nervous system isn't interpreting the delay as a threat or a problem. It's just a neutral state of being. And this plays out everywhere. The person who hates waiting is the one refreshing their email every 30 seconds, checking for a response that might not come for hours. They're the one who gets anxious when someone reads their text, but doesn't reply immediately. They're the one who feels genuine distress at the idea of a slow-paced vacation where nothing is scheduled. The person who doesn't mind waiting is the one who sends an email and forgets about it until the response comes. They're the one who can wait days for a text back without spiraling into anxiety. They're the one who finds peace in slowness, in gaps, in the spaces between things. Neither approach is superior, but our culture definitely has a bias. Productivity culture, hustle culture, efficiency obsession. These all reward people who hate waiting. Move faster. Do more. Optimize everything. Every second should be productive. Waiting is wasting. And if you're someone who needs constant forward motion, this cultural messaging validates you. It tells you you're ambitious, driven, successful. But if you're someone who's comfortable with slowness, who doesn't feel the need to optimize every moment, you're labeled lazy, unmotivated, not hungry enough. But let's look at the costs. People who can't tolerate waiting often burn out. They're running at a pace that's unsustainable. They're so focused on the next thing that they can't enjoy the current thing. They're chronically stressed because life inherently involves waiting. Traffic, lines, responses, results, healing, growth. All of these things take time, and if your nervous system interprets time as a threat, you're going to spend a lot of your life in a state of low-level anxiety. People who are comfortable with waiting have their own challenges. In a world that moves fast, they can get left behind. Opportunities go to people who jump on them immediately. Jobs go to candidates who respond first. Relationships develop with people who text back quickly. If you're someone who moves slowly, who needs time to process, who doesn't feel urgency the way others do, you might miss things. Not because you're incapable, but because the pace of modern life doesn't accommodate your natural rhythm. What if we created space for both? What if we acknowledged that some people need speed and some people need slowness, and both are valid? What if we stopped treating patience as a virtue and impatience as a vice, and instead saw them as different neurological configurations that serve different purposes? Let's talk about the last distinction, and this might be the most fundamental one. Order versus chaos. You walk into someone's home and it's immaculate. Everything has a place. The books are organized by color or author or genre. The kitchen counter is clear. The bed is made with hospital corners. There's no clutter, no mess, no randomness. This space makes them feel calm, grounded, in control. The physical order mirrors the mental order they need to function. Chaos in their environment creates chaos in their mind. You walk into someone else's home and it's explosion. Books piled on every surface. Papers scattered. Dishes in the sink. Clothes on the floor. And yet they know where everything is. They can find what they need. The chaos doesn't bother them. In fact, the chaos feels creative, alive, full of possibility. When things are too organized, too sterile, they feel constrained. The physical chaos mirrors the mental flexibility they need to think. People who need order are not obsessive-compulsive, though they're often labeled that way. They have what's called a low tolerance for environmental disorder. Visual clutter creates cognitive load for them. Their brain has to process all the visual information, and if the environment is chaotic, it's exhausting. They can't think clearly. They can't relax. The act of organizing, of creating order, is not about control. It's about creating an environment where their brain can rest. People who love chaos are not messy or lazy or disorganized in the pejorative sense. They have what's called a high tolerance for environmental disorder, and often a need for visual stimulation. A too clean environment feels dead to them. Boring. Uninspiring. They think better with a bit of mess around them. The piles of papers are not forgotten tasks. They're active projects, visual reminders, physical manifestations of the many things they're working on simultaneously. Their chaos has its own logic, its own system, even if it's not visible to others. And once more, we see the conflict. The person who needs order looks at the chaos lover's space and feels anxiety. How can you think in this? How can you find anything? How can you relax? The person who loves chaos looks at the order lover's space and feels suffocated. Where's the life? Where's the personality? How can you be creative in something so sterile? Both are projecting their own needs onto the other person's space and finding the other person's approach incomprehensible. This plays out in shared living situations all the time. Roommates, partners, families. One person needs the kitchen clean before they can cook. The other person is fine cooking around last night's dishes. One person makes the bed every morning without thinking about it. The other person sees making the bed as a pointless task. One person needs all the papers filed. The other person has a creative filing system that involves strategic piling. And if they can't understand that these are different but equally valid approaches, resentment builds. The order person feels like they're doing all the work. The chaos person feels like they're being nagged and controlled. But here's the deeper truth. These 5 distinctions, interrupting versus waiting, following rules versus bending them, planning versus improvising, hating waiting versus not minding it, needing order versus loving chaos. They're not really 5 separate things. They're all expressions of deeper neurological patterns. They're all related to how your brain processes information, how your nervous system responds to stimuli, how much structure and predictability you need to feel safe and function well. Some people have nervous systems that crave certainty, structure, predictability, order. These are the people who wait their turn, follow the rules, plan everything, get anxious when things are slow or messy. Their brains are wired to find safety in knowing what's coming, in having systems and structures and clear expectations. This is not rigidity. This is not being uptight. This is their nervous system's way of regulating itself. Other people have nervous systems that crave novelty, flexibility, spontaneity, stimulation. These are the people who interrupt because the thought can't wait. Bend rules because context matters more than blanket policies. Improvise because planning feels restrictive. Don't mind waiting because they're not goal-focused. Love chaos because it feels alive. Their brains are wired to find safety and adaptability, in being able to respond to whatever comes, in not being locked into predetermined paths. This is not irresponsibility. This is not being scattered. This is their nervous system's way of staying engaged and alive. And here's what nobody tells you. You can't fundamentally change which type you are. You can learn skills. You can develop flexibility. The interrupter can practice waiting. The rule follower can learn to question. The planner can work on being more spontaneous. The person who hates waiting can develop mindfulness practices. The person who needs order can learn to tolerate some mess. But you can't rewire your basic neurological architecture. You can't make yourself fundamentally comfortable with something that your nervous system experiences as threatening or uncomfortable. What you can do is understand yourself. You can recognize that your way of operating is not a moral failing. It's not something wrong with you. It's how your brain works. And you can stop trying to force yourself into a mold that doesn't fit. If you're an interrupter, maybe you need to find spaces where rapid-fire conversation is welcome instead of constantly suppressing your natural style. If you're a waiter, maybe you need to practice claiming space instead of always deferring. If you're a rule follower, maybe you need to recognize that your conscientiousness is valuable and stop letting rule benders make you feel like you're doing it wrong. If you're a rule bender, maybe you need to own your independent thinking instead of constantly justifying it. If you're a planner, maybe you need to stop apologizing for your need for structure. If you're an improviser, maybe you need to stop feeling guilty for not having a 5-year plan. If you hate waiting, maybe you need to build a life with less waiting instead of white-knuckling your way through constant delays. If you don't mind waiting, maybe you need to protect your slower pace instead of constantly trying to speed up. If you need order, maybe you need to create spaces that are organized instead of tolerating chaos that exhausts you. If you love chaos, maybe you need to give yourself permission to be messy instead of forcing yourself into systems that feel dead. This is radical self-acceptance. This is saying, I am wired this way, and that's okay. This is stopping the constant internal war between who you are and who you think you should be. And let me tell you, this internal war is exhausting. It's depleting. It's the source of so much anxiety and depression and feeling like you're fundamentally broken. Because when your natural way of being is constantly at odds with what the world tells you is right, when you're spending all your energy trying to be someone you're not, there's no energy left for actually living. But when you accept how you're wired, when you stop fighting it and start working with it, everything changes. You stop feeling guilty for your needs. You stop apologizing for your preferences. You start making choices that actually fit you instead of choices you think you're supposed to make. You find people who appreciate your natural style instead of constantly trying to change you. You build a life that supports how you actually function, instead of constantly struggling against your own nature. And if you're still here with me, if this is resonating, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. This is what we do here. We explore the psychology behind why we are the way we are. We validate experiences that the world dismisses. We create understanding where there's usually just judgment. Every week, I bring you content that goes deep into these patterns, these differences, these aspects of being human that nobody else wants to talk about honestly. So if that speaks to you, if you want more of this, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Join this community of people who are done pretending to be someone they're not. And while you're at it, if this video is hitting home, if you're seeing yourself in these words, leave a like. It helps more people find this content. It tells me that this matters, that going deep into these topics is valuable. Your engagement literally shapes what I create next. So if you want more psychology content like this, let me know. Hit that like button. Now let me tell you what happens in relationships when these differences collide. You're dating someone. You're building a life with someone. And every single one of these differences becomes a potential point of conflict. You interrupt. They wait. And they feel unheard. They plan everything. You want to be spontaneous, and you feel controlled. You need order, they're chaotic, and you're constantly stressed by the state of the shared space. They don't mind waiting, you're climbing the walls with impatience, and they think you're being ridiculous. You follow the rules, they bend them, and you resent that they get away with things while you do everything by the book. These conflicts are real. They're significant. They're not just about communication styles or personality quirks. They're about fundamental incompatibilities in how you experience the world. And if you don't understand that, if you keep thinking the other person just needs to try harder or care more or be more considerate, you're going to be perpetually frustrated. Because they're not going to change. Not fundamentally. They can compromise. They can meet you halfway. But they can't become a different person with a different nervous system. The question is, not can this person change to be more like me? The question is, can we both honor our differences while finding ways to coexist? Can the interrupter learn to pause sometimes, while the waiter learns to jump in sometimes? Can the planner and the improviser take turns choosing how to spend weekends? Can the person who needs order have their spaces while the chaos lover has theirs? Can the rule follower and the rule bender respect each other's approaches even when they don't understand them? This requires something most people don't want to give. It requires letting go of the belief that your way is the right way. It requires seeing the other person's approach not as wrong, but as different. It requires curiosity instead of judgment. It requires asking, why do you do it that way, instead of insisting you should do it my way. It requires recognizing that love is not about finding someone who operates exactly like you. It's about finding someone whose differences you can appreciate instead of trying to eliminate. And let me be clear. Some differences are too big. Some nervous systems are too incompatible. The planner who gets genuine anxiety from lack of structure probably shouldn't be with the improviser who gets genuine anxiety from too much structure. Not because either is wrong, but because the constant negotiation will exhaust both of them. The person who needs silence and order and predictability probably shouldn't be with the person who needs noise and chaos and spontaneity. Not because they can't love each other, but because they'll make each other miserable trying to accommodate fundamentally incompatible needs. This is why understanding yourself is so important. Not so you can fix yourself, but so you can make informed choices about who and what you bring into your life. If you know you're a planner, you can look for someone who at least respects planning even if they're not a planner themselves. If you know you need order, you can have honest conversations about shared spaces before moving in together. If you know you're an interrupter, you can find friends who appreciate your enthusiasm instead of constantly making you feel like you're doing conversation wrong. But this also means being honest about your limitations. It means saying, I cannot tolerate chaos in my living space. This is not negotiable. I need a partner who either needs order too or is willing to keep shared spaces organized. It means saying, I think out loud and I interrupt and I've tried to change and I can't. I need people who can handle my conversational style. It means saying, I hate waiting and I get genuinely distressed by delays and slowness. I need a life that moves at my pace. It means saying, I don't plan. I can't plan. Planning makes me miserable. I need flexibility and spontaneity, or I feel dead inside. These are not character flaws to confess shamefully. These are boundaries to state clearly. This is who I am. This is what I need. This is not up for debate. And if that doesn't work for you, that's okay, but we're probably not compatible. This honesty, this clarity, it saves so much pain. It prevents years of trying to change each other. It prevents the slow build of resentment that comes from constantly suppressing your needs to keep the peace. And here's something else. Understanding these differences creates compassion. When you realize that the person who interrupts you is not being dismissive, but is genuinely wired to think and speak simultaneously, it's less personal. When you understand that the person who can't stand your mess is not trying to control you, but is genuinely experiencing your chaos as cognitive overload, you can have empathy for that. When you recognize that the person who refuses to plan is not being flaky, but is genuinely experiencing your structure as suffocating, you can stop taking it as a rejection of you. This doesn't mean you don't still need boundaries. This doesn't mean you have to tolerate behavior that hurts you. But it does mean you can see the other person as human, as doing their best with the nervous system they have, rather than as deliberately trying to make your life difficult. And from that place of compassion, you can have very different conversations. Conversations about accommodation instead of blame. Conversations about finding creative solutions instead of insisting on being right. Maybe the solution is separate offices, one organized and one chaotic. Maybe it's taking turns planning vacations. Maybe it's agreeing that in group conversations, the interrupters get the first half and the waiters get the second half. Maybe it's the person who hates waiting doing the tasks that require speed, while the person who doesn't mind waiting handles the tasks that require patience. Maybe it's the rule follower managing the finances, while the rule bender handles the creative problem solving. These differences, when understood and leveraged, can actually be complementary instead of combative. But again, this only works if both people are willing to see the value in the other's approach. If one person is convinced that their way is superior, and the other person just needs to get with the program, no amount of understanding will help. You can't force someone to validate an approach they fundamentally don't respect. And if you're in a relationship with someone who constantly makes you feel wrong for how you're wired, someone who refuses to see your differences as legitimate, that's valuable information. That's telling you something about whether this person can actually love all of you or only the parts that conform to their preferences. You deserve to be with people who see your differences and appreciate them, who understand that your need to interrupt comes from enthusiasm, not disrespect, who recognize that your planning reduces your anxiety, and they respect that even if they don't need it themselves, who see your ability to wait patiently as a strength, not a weakness, who appreciate your rule following as conscientiousness, not rigidity, who value your ability to improvise as creativity, not irresponsibility. You deserve people who make space for how you're wired instead of constantly trying to rewire you. And the same goes for friendships, for work environments, for communities. You should be looking for spaces where your natural operating style is welcomed, where you don't have to constantly suppress or perform or pretend. If you're an interrupter, find the fast-paced, dynamic conversations where that's normal. If you're a waiter, find the thoughtful, slow conversations where there's space for depth. If you're a planner, find the people who appreciate your organization. If you're an improviser, find the people who love your spontaneity. If you need order, create it in your spaces. If you love chaos, give yourself permission for mess. This is not about finding people who are exactly like you. This is about finding people who respect how you're different from them. And that respect, that honoring of differences, is what allows for genuine connection. Because when you're not constantly defending your way of being, when you're not constantly justifying your needs, you can actually relax. You can be yourself. And from that place of authentic being, real intimacy becomes possible. Let me close with this. Your brain works the way it works. Your nervous system responds the way it responds. You can learn skills and develop flexibility and grow in your capacity to handle things that don't come naturally. But you cannot fundamentally become a different person, and you shouldn't have to. The world needs interrupters and waiters. It needs rule followers and rule benders. It needs planners and improvisers. It needs people who hate waiting and people who don't mind it. It needs people who create order and people who thrive in chaos. The diversity of thinking styles is not a problem to solve. It's the richness of human experience. It's how we innovate and stabilize simultaneously. It's how we create new possibilities while maintaining functional systems. The tension between these different approaches is generative. It creates dialogue. It forces us to consider perspectives we wouldn't naturally access. It makes us better, collectively, than we would be if we all thought the same way. But individually, you need to stop fighting yourself. You need to stop trying to be the person you think you should be and start being the person you actually are. You need to honor your wiring, understand your needs, communicate your boundaries, and build a life that actually fits you. This is the work. Not becoming someone else, not fixing what's broken, but accepting what is and working with it instead of against it. And when you do this, when you truly accept yourself, you give others permission to do the same. Your children, if you have them, grow up seeing that there are many ways to be in the world, and all of them are valid. Your friends learn that they don't have to conform to be loved. Your partners learn that differences can be honored instead of erased. Your coworkers see that productivity doesn't require one specific approach. You become a model of authentic living in a world that desperately needs more authenticity. So stop apologizing for interrupting and start finding people who appreciate your quick mind. Stop feeling guilty for following rules and start owning your integrity. Stop forcing yourself to plan if you're an improviser, and stop forcing yourself to wing it if you're a planner. Stop white-knuckling your way through waiting and start building efficiency into your life. Stop trying to be messy if you need order and stop trying to be organized if you thrive in chaos. Just stop. Stop fighting who you are. Start being who you are. And watch how everything shifts when you finally give yourself that permission. Think about all the energy you've wasted trying to be different. All the mental bandwidth spent monitoring yourself, correcting yourself, forcing yourself into patterns that don't fit. What if you redirected that energy? What if instead of fighting your nature, you worked with it? The interrupter who stops trying to suppress their thoughts and instead finds work environments where rapid collaboration is valued. The rule follower who stops second-guessing their conscientiousness and instead seeks positions where attention to detail and protocol matter. The improviser who stops feeling inadequate for not having everything mapped out and instead builds a career around adaptability and creative problem-solving. The person who hates waiting, who designs their life to minimize delays rather than constantly battling impatience. The chaos lover who stops trying to maintain sterile spaces and instead creates a living environment that matches their need for visual stimulation. This is not giving up. This is not settling. This is strategic self-awareness. This is understanding that you have a finite amount of energy and willpower, and you can either spend it fighting yourself or you can spend it building something meaningful. You can either exhaust yourself trying to function in ways that go against your grain, or you can find the grain and work with it. The carpenter doesn't fight the wood grain. They work with it. They understand that cutting against the grain creates splinters and resistance. Cutting with the grain creates smooth progress. The same principle applies to your psychological makeup. And here's what's revolutionary about this approach. When you stop spending energy on being someone you're not, you suddenly have energy for everything else. For relationships, for creativity, for rest, for joy. You're not constantly drained by the effort of maintaining a performance. You're not perpetually exhausted from suppressing your natural responses. You can actually engage with life because you're not using all your resources to monitor and control and adjust yourself constantly. But this requires grieving. It requires grieving the version of yourself you thought you should be. The planner who thought they should be more spontaneous. The improviser who thought they should be more organized. The interrupter who thought they should be quieter. The waiter who thought they should be bolder. The rule follower who thought they should be more rebellious. The rule bender who thought they should be more compliant. You have to let go of these fantasies of who you'd be if only you were different. You have to accept that you are who you are, and that's not going to fundamentally change. This grief is real. It can feel like loss, like giving up on potential, like admitting defeat, but it's not defeat. It's reality. It's the difference between spending your life chasing an impossible standard and spending your life building something real with who you actually are. And yes, there's mourning involved. Mourning the life you imagined you'd have if you were wired differently. Mourning the ease you thought you'd experience if you could just be more like the people who seem to navigate the world effortlessly. Mourning the relationships that might have worked if you were someone else. But on the other side of that grief is freedom. Real freedom. Not the false freedom of endless possibility that comes from refusing to accept your limitations, but the real freedom of knowing exactly who you are and what you need and making choices from that grounded place. The freedom of not wondering if you're doing it right because you've defined what right means for you specifically. The freedom of not comparing yourself to others because you understand that you're operating with different hardware and different software, and the comparison is meaningless. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. The interrupter stops apologizing and instead says up front, I think out loud, and I process by talking. If I interrupt, it's enthusiasm, not dismissal. Please let me know if you need me to slow down. The waiter stops forcing themselves to speak up in situations that don't honor their processing style, and instead seeks conversations where there's actual space for depth. The rule follower stops questioning their conscientiousness, and instead says, I need clear guidelines to function well. I'm not being rigid. This is how I work best. The rule bender stops defending their flexibility, and instead says, I think critically about which rules serve the purpose and which don't. I'm not being difficult. I'm using discernment. The planner stops feeling like their need for structure is a weakness, and instead says, I plan, because it reduces my anxiety and helps me function. I'm not controlling. I'm managing my nervous system. The improviser stops feeling guilty about their lack of long-term plans, and instead says, I work better with flexibility and room to adapt. I'm not flaky. I'm responsive to what actually emerges. The person who hates waiting stops white-knuckling their way through delays and instead says, I have a low tolerance for waiting. I need to build my life to minimize unnecessary delays. This is a real need, not impatience. The person who doesn't mind waiting stops pushing themselves to move faster and instead says, I work at my own pace. Rushing doesn't make me more productive. It makes me anxious and scattered. The person who needs order stops tolerating chaos that makes them dysfunctional and instead says, I need visual order to think clearly. This is not optional for me. I need my spaces organized. The person who loves chaos stops trying to maintain systems that kill their creativity and instead says, I think better with some visual stimulation around me. What looks messy to you is how I track multiple projects. This works for my brain. This is boundaries. Real boundaries. Not demands that other people change. Not insistence that your way is the only way. But clear communication about what you need to function well and what environments support you versus drain you. And from that clarity, you can make much better decisions about where you put your energy, who you spend time with, what work you take on, how you structure your days. And some people will not understand. Some people will think you're being difficult or inflexible or making excuses. Let them think that. Their opinion of you is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself. To honor what you know to be true about how you function. To stop sacrificing your well-being to make others comfortable. To recognize that living authentically will always be uncomfortable for people who are invested in you being someone else. This is where the reparenting work comes in again. Because if you grew up in an environment where your natural way of being was criticized or punished or dismissed, standing firm in who you are now will trigger old wounds. It will bring up fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of being too much. Fear of being not enough. Fear that if you stop performing, you'll be abandoned. These fears are real. They're based on real experiences. But they're also old. They're from a time when you were dependent on people who couldn't or wouldn't accept you as you were. You're not that dependent anymore. You're an adult. You have choices. You can seek out people who do accept you. You can leave situations that require you to be someone you're not. You can build a life that actually fits you instead of constantly trying to fit yourself into a life that was designed for someone else. But you have to be willing to walk through the fear. You have to be willing to risk rejection. You have to be willing to discover that some people only wanted the performed version of you, not the real one. And yes, that's painful. But it's also clarifying. It shows you who your real people are. The ones who stay when you stop performing. The ones who appreciate you more when you're authentic. The ones who see your differences as features, not bugs. These are your people. Everyone else was just passing through. And the sooner you let them pass through, the sooner you make room for the people who actually belong in your life. This journey of self-acceptance, of understanding your wiring and working with it instead of against it, it's not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. It's catching yourself when you start to apologize for being yourself and choosing not to. It's noticing when you're suppressing your needs to keep the peace and asking yourself if the peace is worth the cost. It's recognizing when you're in an environment that requires you to be someone you're not and making plans to change that environment. It's small decisions, repeated over time, that gradually shift the entire trajectory of your life. And the beautiful thing is, the more you practice this, the easier it gets. The more you honor your needs, the less guilty you feel about having needs. The more you communicate your boundaries, the more natural it becomes. The more you choose people and situations that fit you, the less tolerant you become of people and situations that don't. You're essentially retraining your nervous system to expect acceptance instead of criticism, to anticipate understanding instead of judgment, to know that being yourself is safe because you've created a life where it actually is safe. This is the work. Not becoming someone different, not fixing what's broken, but creating conditions where who you already are can thrive. And when you do this, when you really commit to this, everything changes. Your relationships deepen because they're based on truth. Your work becomes more satisfying because it aligns with your strengths. Your mental health improves because you're not constantly at war with yourself. Your energy increases because you're not wasting it on performance. Your life starts to feel like it actually belongs to you, instead of like you're living someone else's blueprint. You are not broken. You are not wrong. You are not too much or not enough. You are wired a certain way, and that wiring is information, not a problem. Use it, honor it, build around it, and find the people and places and situations that let you be exactly who you are. That's where life happens. That's where joy lives. That's where you finally get to breathe. That's where you discover that the version of yourself you've been trying so hard to become already exists. It's been there all along. It's just been buried under years of trying to be someone else. And now you get to excavate it. Now you get to let it out. Now you get to live as that person instead of performing as someone you're not. And that is what freedom actually feels like.